Good morning, everyone. So, as you can see, we started on our 69 Camaro project, and originally it had a 350 small block. And what we're going to be doing is doing an LT1 setup with a 383 stroker with a supercharger. Now, before we get started to that, I wanted to go over to you guys and go what's the differences between the 350 small block Chevy and the LT1. Surprisingly, they had the similar type of cast iron block, with the same 3.48 inch stroke and a 4-inch bore. 3.48 inch stroke with a 4-inch bore. Size of the bore, cylinder bore, is one of the things it has. Secondly, the cylinder heads on the LT1 compared to the small block Chevy is aluminum to save weight. Third, they'll have different style pistons and rods, powder coated pistons, with a higher compression ratio. Third, with those cylinder heads for the engine on the LT1 compared to the small block Chevy, is that it has a smaller combustion chamber, which we'll get to, with larger intake and exhaust valves for better airflow. Fourth, at the top deck surface of the block, you'll have bolts set at a different position as well to mount the cylinder heads. Fifth part, the LT1 has a reverse cooling system where they have to flow at a reverse style coming from the back to put the lines of cooling going through the cylinder heads back to the water pump. Fifth, since it has a different it has a similar type of cast iron block, they use a stronger crank, unlike the small block Chevy. And also, with the pistons, the LT1 has a higher compression ratio. Now, the similarities they have, like I said, has a 3.48 inch bore, stroke, a 4-inch bore, okay, a similar type of camshaft, maybe 2 to 3 degrees more timing, duration of a camshaft. Another thing is all the performance parts you can get as far as forged pistons, rods, even a stroker crankshaft, they're all interchangeable because they also have the same displacement. They use the same main caps and main bolts. They have the same intake port style, so you can interchange anything from a 350 small block of a high-rise intake manifold you can put onto that LT1. Another thing that's similar cast iron manifolds, at the exhaust ports, you actually can interchange it from a small block. Now, what does this mean? Well, on the cylinder heads on the LT1 is going to be aluminum. Aluminum head is supposed to give it lighter weight to run more efficiently with power to weight ratio for your engine. Secondly, the 350 small block usually has a lower compression ratio between an 8 to a 9 to 1, between an 8 to 1 compression ratio and a 9 to 1 compression ratio. But also the cylinder heads on this small block is a cast iron with a larger displacement on the combustion chambers, leaving a lower compression ratio. Now, what would be the difference as far as another difference between the small block Chevy and the LT1? Well, on the LT1, it goes to a port injection system, multi-port injection system. So each cylinder is going to have their own fuel injectors, while the small block will have a carburetor system usually, depending on the years, or a throttle body injection on some Silverados from the 90s. So let's go over this. I'm going to show you guys the cylinder heads. Let's just raise this here real quick. Now, what I mean that the cylinder heads on a 350 small block, okay? Let's just do with 2 cylinders here. Let's just do with 2 cylinders, okay? Cylinders on the 350 Vortec okay, they'll have a larger intake valve and a smaller valve, exhaust valve, okay? On the 350 small block heads, there's circular combustion chambers, okay? Usually, they'll have like around a 1.7 to 1.8 inch intake valve with a 1.5 inch exhaust valve, usually, after modifications on the small block. Now, with an LT head, so this is a 350 small block Chevy cylinder head look like, okay? On the LT1 head, usually the cylinder heads look more like this. The rough drawing. The cylinder heads will look like this with larger valves with the same exhaust valve. So let's make a little better one here. So they use a larger intake valve and on the same exhaust valve, even after you pour it on the same part, same size. So what does this mean? So because of the comparisons of the LT1, okay, and the 350 small block Chevy, yes, they can use the same bore size, fit the same bore size for a 4-inch bore, but the cylinder heads with the combustion chambers on the LT1 are more squeezed in, and that in this situation you're also going to get a smaller diameter or a smaller displacement on your combustion chambers. A lower volume on your combustion chambers on your cylinder heads will give it a less displacement on your cylinder heads will give you a higher compression. Some cases you can do as far as like the newer LS heads where you can actually just mill the heads and get a higher compression because you have a smaller displacement on your combustion chambers. But the proof of this is to be able to compress more air to let more airflow go efficiently with a larger intake valve with the same exhaust valve. Because what they want to do is be able to compress more air, a more volume of air at a longer duration, to get more horsepower and also more torque. So, why is this efficient? Well, the LT1 Chevrolet tried to make compared to the small block Chevy is that with a higher compression ratio of efficient power of this idea is to get better gas mileage and better performance. And obviously keep the same stroke at a 3.48 inch stroke to having a higher RPM with a slightly better duration on your camshaft. Slightly more aggressive camshaft with better time, slightly more aggressive timing. Which is like what they put into like the early 90s F-body Camaros, Trans Ams, and also on the Corvettes, like the C3 and C4 Corvettes. So, and some of the C5. So, that's another difference you can make. But as far as all the aftermarket parts, as far as camshaft goes, crankshaft, piston rods, pistons, they are very also interchangeable. Like I said, they have the same same build where the location for the main caps are, and also for as far as the bearings for the main bearings for your crankshaft. The only difference is, and also as well, the last difference is why the LT1 is not interchangeable to the 350 small block. Is because when you look at the cylinders of the bores of your block, okay, at the top deck of your block, they'll have bolts to mount your block, okay? So, if this was one way to show how the block is on the small block Chevy, and let's say, for example, there's only 6 bolts. Just an example, okay? The LT1, their block is actually, the bolts on the block are actually mounted in different directions. Now, those ideas, there's a few people that try to do an LT1 swap, heads swapped onto the small block Chevy, but what they end up doing was they end up drilling the cylinder head of the LT1 to be able to mount to match the bolts mounting for the block on the 350 small block. Now, when they retap and re-drill new holes onto the cylinder head, what's going to happen is you lose the strength of your cylinder head, or in many cases, we can make it crack. Also, you'll have to make your own custom return line of a cooling system with the coolant. But after spending thousands of dollars going that route, it's not even worth it. You might as well just keep your 350 cylinder heads or swap over to an LT1. Now, the last thing I want to go over is reliability on the LT1. The LT1 is more of a high performance engine on the LT1. It gives it more strength. As far as reliability goes, you can actually, it's supposed to be made more for high performance, where the 350 small block was meant more for the trucks. Kind of like the same, when I said also is how the LS heads, these LT heads cannot be interchangeable on the 350 small block. It's the same idea if you were trying to put LS7 heads on a 6-liter LQ9. They just don't bolt. You also don't have the different combustion chambers, which is besides the point. But the mounting bolts for the heads going to the block are in a different position. They'll have to drill new holes. You have to do more modifications, and also redoing the block and remachining the cylinder heads. It's just not worth it. But that's the reason why, guys, we're actually going to be doing the LT1 swap out of the 350 instead of the 350 that's originally in the 69 Camaro, because we're going to be able to have a higher but aftermarket piece where you can get it set up for with accessory drive. I'm using a Vortex supercharger. Unlike the small block Chevy, they have a whole different accessory drive too, and so as far as the front end goes, it will be limited to only use a certain supercharger on the 350 to put a certain amount of boost, but not as high enough where we can get the LT1. Plus, like I said, the cylinder heads are more efficient flowing. We can put more power and run more boost into the system. So that's what I got for you guys here, between the LT1 versus the 350 small block and why we're going this way. Get ready for part 2. We're going to discuss how we're going to be doing the 383 stroker. But yeah, definitely follow us on Instagram, King_Castro_forever on Instagram. Castro Motorsports _S in the end at Facebook, and check out our YouTube page, like, comment, subscribe at Castro Motorsports. Thanks, guys.